Hello, I'm Rory Underwood and you're listening to Veterans Work, the podcast, a series that explores the myriads of skills and talents that makes veterans so valuable in business. Veterans Work, the podcast, grew out of Veterans Work, the UK's leading independent veterans employability campaign. I'm Rory Underwood and I support Veterans Work.
Hello, welcome to Veterans Work, the podcast. I'm Kate Silverton. In today's episode, we look at the values that veterans share, above all the drive to help and that sense of purpose that's of particular importance in today's climate. I'm joined by Stephen James, veteran, primary school teacher and founder of an online school in response to COVID-19. Mike Crofts, veteran, CEO of Amodigo, the leadership and human performance specialists, and founder of 3 Pillars Project, a charity delivering long-term rehabilitation to young people in custody through sports-based mentoring programs. Finally, we have Sally Orange, veteran, mental health campaigner, and volunteer for the Nightingale Hospital. So I'd like to begin, if I may, by asking each of you just to tell us a little bit about you, your personal journey, as it were, from military to beyond, and how the transition has been. So, Stephen, can we start with you, please?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Wales, in Cardiff. It's quite a rough council estate, I suppose. And I suppose the army for me was always a kind of a way out. I had my uncles, my cousins had all joined, so I kind of always looked up to them as kind of role models. So ended up joined the intelligence corps, which was brilliant. So it's such an interesting job. Deployed to Afghanistan twice, once in a defensive kind of role and once in a kind of offensive role. The second time was most interesting because it was kind of a multinational operation, working with the Americans, the Canadians, the Australians, and that was just fascinating. Left just at the end of kind of 2009, completely kind of at a loose end, I suppose. And I was thinking about the things I enjoyed in the military. I enjoyed the intelligence work, but I also enjoyed the teaching side of things. So I was a battlefield casualty drills instructor, a map reading instructor, all those kinds of things, which are all good fun. Courses that people kind of have to do. They don't like doing, but they have to do them. And I kind of picked up on that, and I was like, right, the teaching side of things is something I'm really, really passionate about. So when I left, I kind of used my resettlement time to try out kind of lots of different jobs. And I applied to a school just to get some work experience, I suppose. And they got back to me and said, yep, come in for 2 weeks. And they paired me with a teacher called Fred James, no relation. But he was, funnily enough, he was a veteran as well. He had served in the infantry and he had retrained as a teacher. So I had 2 weeks with this chap of just kind of picking his mind about what it was like being a teacher. And because of him, I then ended up going to university. Very lucky that the army paid for a proportion of my degree, and then got a job in a primary school, which I left in September to start my own business last year.
And you've been, incredible story. I'm scribbling furiously away because there's lots of notes to pick up that actually from the first podcast that we did. And I'm thinking this all ties in. This is just wonderful. But let's just bring in Sally and Mike now. Sally, tell us a little bit about your journey, your story.
So, I had no military background at all, not from a military family, and was quite late in joining. It wasn't until I was 24 that I joined. And I was a physiotherapist, and so served in the Royal Army Medical Corps for 22 years. And I've had a fantastic career. Served in Afghanistan, which I would say was the highlight of my career. I think it's all the training that you've put to use, and actually, although there were some really difficult and really severe casualties and injuries that I saw, you learn so much from that, both about yourself, your team, and the individuals that you're treating as well. So that's been fantastic. And then in 2019, unfortunately, I was medically retired, and that was just before the 2020, so it didn't quite go to plan, but different opportunities came about, and I was able to put to use the skills that I'd learned as a physiotherapist, and go and work with the Nightingale Hospital in London.
So we'll explore that a little bit more, but just stepping back to that 24-year-old then, what was it that took you into the military?
Excitement. There was so much of what I was about that was just there on a plate for me. And I thought, why have I never heard about this before? Which was a bit of a shame that it had taken till then. But there was meeting new people, getting involved in different things that were quite exciting and fulfilling, I guess, what I was about, the purpose of wanting to help other people. I'd known since the age of 16 that I wanted to become a physiotherapist. And then to realise that I could do it in times of war, when people were at their lowest, was a real opportunity that made me think I'll go for it.
Mike, what about you?
I'm Mike Crofts. I was an officer in the Royal Tank Regiment for 8 years. I was very fortunate in my time to also do 2 tours of Afghanistan, one back in 2010 and one in 2013. They varied quite significantly in terms of what I was doing. So the first tour, I was attached to the Irish Guards. I was an A&A Afghan Army advisor down the remote patrol base down in Helmand. So I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to live in a goat shed for 6 months, which actually retrospectively, just to echo everyone else's points, actually that kind of experience is what stands out most looking back on your military service.
In what sense?
I think anyone in the military who tells you that they don't enjoy a little bit of hardship is lying. People like to be up against it, this kind of sense that you are on the frontier, you are you are sacrificing for your country. I think that really relates to the sense of purpose that the military provides, and I think roughing it in a compound for 6 months is a great part of that. And then the second tour, I was part of a brigade ops group, so we were in Warthog. It's an amphibious vehicle, and we were moving all over Helmand and doing cordons and searching for IED factories and weapons caches. So militarily, I felt like I had a really, really good run of being an army officer, and kind of came to 2015 and decided that I wanted, looking ahead, I felt the army changing, and I felt that the next 8 years weren't going to be like the previous 8 years, and it was time for me to transition on. And I'd love to say that I was 100% certain that was what I was absolutely clear about doing at the time, but it wasn't. It was maybe I made the decision very firmly, but I think as the time goes on, you are filled with uncertainty about have you done the right thing or not. But my transition has unfolded and been quite interesting since then, and I've gone on to do a couple of different things involving setting up a charity and also setting up a company, which I think really, looking back at it, having come from the army, it really has kind of set me up to succeed in those things. But also, I'm absolutely aware that I had to go through quite a lot of personal evolution to be successful and to succeed, flourish outside the military.
So what kept you going? Because I can imagine that's something that many people recognise, that sort of sense of doubt. We might make a decision, but then in that period of transition, we're thinking, oh goodness, what have I done? So what sustained you? And what advice would you give to anybody listening or watching now who's thinking, well, I'm in that place, that transitional period? I'll ask everybody this, but just staying with you for a minute, Mike.
I think there's a very thin line between what we might call determination and resilience and stubbornness and pride, and they can actually sway into one side to the next. I would say I became quite determined to succeed, but what I realised quite quickly was that whilst you might have a plan A, you need to be open and embrace your plan B, C, and possibly your plan L, because things do change. And actually, as you learn more about life post-military, you realise that actually it's quite different to maybe what you anticipated. So I think really being open-minded, but utilising, depending on those qualities, skills that the military builds in all of us, I think having that balance is really effective.
No, really good point. And Stephen, just to bring you in on that, one, it did make me smile when you were talking about hardship, because I wanted to ask you about being a primary school teacher and how does that compare? But in terms, just picking up Mike's more serious point there, you were wooed by various private intelligence firms, but you still decided to become a primary school teacher on leaving. So what was it that gave you've mentioned your mentor as such. Was there anything else in terms of that sense of purpose and your own values that pushed you in that direction?
And absolutely, I think they're the same sort of values that drive you to join the military. They're the ones of service, service before self. And I think even as a soldier, you're serving your country, and you can take this kind of very kind of bloated view about it. But then, as a primary school teacher, I'm serving my community and the people that I live around, and to me that's really, really important. And the fact that I can go to Tesco's or other supermarkets are available, and recognise people, and they'll say, "Oh, hello, Mr. James, blah blah blah. You're my son's teacher," and that to me is. If I could bottle that up, that would be like the best feeling ever for a teacher. Not when they look in your basket and they see several bottles of wine.
Yeah.
But that kind of thing to me is crucial. You get that kind of feel good factor, I suppose, from whatever job you're doing, and it doesn't feel so much like a job. It feels more like a calling, and it's quite a twee way of saying it, but the military was the same thing to me. It was a calling. I kind of had to join. I had to get it out of my system. And the same thing with teaching. I had to do something that served, whether that be join the police force or a fire brigade or something. I had to do something which unfortunately it doesn't pay the millions of pounds, but I'm happy because of it.
I was going to say, I just think that sounds utterly wonderful. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who are earning millions of pounds who would rather be in your position. I'm literally just thinking, aren't you just thinking that you must be the coolest teacher on the block? The parents, the questions that you must be asked, sir, can we see your gun? I only say this because my husband is former Royal Marines and just, my kids are primary age, and that's the question that he gets asked, even though he left quite a while ago.
It's actually, a really difficult, it was a really difficult transition from being in the military to becoming a primary school teacher, because as two professions, I think they're kind of polar opposites of, kind of soft skills that you need. As a primary school teacher, you're very much kind of on the front line of those sharp emotions that young people have, and they sway from one side to the other. Whereas in the military, you're more, maybe more roughy tufty, a bit more robust. You probably don't talk about that kind of thing as much, certainly when I served. So, that was a big transition, and also the kind of, I suppose, the jokes you can have in the staff room are very different to the jokes you can have in the mess, as I've found out several times. But
yeah.
It doesn't always go down so well. But again, that was a huge learning curve for me.
So taking that, and sorry, I'm going to bring the two of you in, but just taking that point on transition, what would have made that transition easier, or did you just simply have to go through that process? What advice would you give to people? At
the first time, it's when you decide to leave. So you've got that kind of year where you're working your notice, but you're also kind of looking at the areas where you can go and potentially apply your trade. That's a really crucial time, because you've got the safety net of a wage coming in, but also the opportunity to go and explore lots of different professions, and take the army up on its offers. And that kind of transition is just something you have to push through, I suppose, get through to the other side, where I get to the point now where I'm kind of okay operating in a civilian environment, because I've probably been a teacher now longer than I was in the military. So I've got to that stage where everything's working well, I think. But it is definitely hard.
And you're not sitting still, and we'll come back to it because you're a serial entrepreneur now, which I want to come back to. But Mike, is sort of there elements of that you would, agree with in terms of the transition? You didn't have such a pull as such to one thing. You said you did a number of different things. You're now also working with young people. So perhaps you can just tell us a little bit more about the different jobs that you did do, trying some out for size, and then where you are now.
Yeah, I think actually I probably followed Stephen's advice to the letter. I tried 3 or 4 different things from resettlement and the year after leaving. So whilst on my resettlement, I volunteered in a Young Offenders Institute. And I was helping to run a rugby course. And I was just really struck talking to these teenage boys that had been sentenced and were in prison as children. I was really struck by how much potential they had and how much it was being wasted. And actually, but for a couple of different decisions, they could be in the armed forces, they, ostensibly seen as heroes by the country, or by many within the country. But instead they were kind of wasting their better years behind bars. And something about that really filled me with a sense of shame. So I went off the back of that and started to draft up a course that utilised many of the military values, teamwork, leadership that I myself had been privileged to be exposed to during my time in the army. Whilst I was doing that, I also went and I wrote to an MP and went and volunteered for him for a couple of months just to kind of see inside Parliament, see how it worked. I realised that wasn't really where I wanted to be, where I wanted to work. And I applied for a veterans programme at an investment bank called Goldman Sachs, and was fortunate to get a place on that. Now, in the background, I was also pushing the charitable idea at the same time, which has evolved to become 3 Pillars Project. I think the other thing was the momentum started to build around 3 Pillars Project and the idea, and I kept getting pretty good feedback, a lot of support and encouragement, and my momentum, my mindset started to shift firmly towards that. I was, kind of watching prison videos in my break time. Not that you get much break if you work at an investment bank, but I was watching prison videos and researching it, and I just knew that that's what I had to do. So I finished the internship in April, and we ran our first pilot course in June 2016 in an adult prison. So that was 5 years ago, and we haven't really looked back since. And obviously it's not without its ups and downs, but it's been a great decision. And then more recently, I've also founded a company like Stephen doing leadership and human performance development in companies, a number of corporates. So I've experienced quite a few different things. But I would just echo Stephen's point about service within your local community. I think one of the reasons why military are attracted to service is because whether you're in Afghanistan or you're serving your local community or volunteering, there is something quite patriotic about that. And I think that a lot of veterans get a lot from continuing to serve locally, even though they're not deploying across the world. I think that's a good way of continuing that sense of
I think
giving.
that was backed up as well by a report by King's College, who's saying that 60% of veterans volunteered during COVID, which is really a huge number of people helping out. And it just shows the kind of, I suppose, the spirit there is amongst the veteran community, that they want to help their community, their nation get back on its feet. And I'm sure it'll be exactly the same now as we recover. And
it's important to keep reiterating that, I think, isn't it, for employers, because there's a lot to harness in that. That sense of sort of wanting to have a sense of purpose and a drive and to serve. And I just wonder whether employers, if you think employers, just in your experience, whether they really get that or recognise that in the way that perhaps you'd like. I don't know.
I think there's two sides of that coin. Yes, to what you just said, but also I don't think veterans sell themselves particularly well either.
And why is that? Just because that's what we do? They don't, you don't see it as anything.
When you're leaving the military, you kind of look at your CV, you look at all the different courses that you've done, and you say, right, well, I've done a battlefield casualty course, great, but how does that then translate to working in a primary school? When a child falls over, all you do is put a wet paper towel on it. So it's it's kind of, how do you then turn that language of, right, I can help somebody with a sucking chest wound when they've just grazed their knee, and it's all about the values, as you say. It's, what is it that you bring from the military, and how does that translate into civilian speak? And it takes a while to get that lingo, because it is another language. Well,
you see, now, in podcast 1, in the first episode, this is exactly what came up. And I made this sort of very layman's suggestion that perhaps we needed what I called a cheat sheet, but you could probably put into better language. But literally, you would list all of those exactly as you've just said. Well, I can deal with a sucking chest wound, and I can also put a paper towel on and calm the nerves of a 5-year-old. But actually that language, almost that you can, and actually I'll bring you in on this, Sally, because actually you have worked in Civvy Street, as it were, as a physio, and then gone into the military. So you kind of have seen your skills translate. But just hold the thought: could we have something developed between us that would help in that regard? It just seems such a simple thing to do, but that it doesn't seem that it's really been done, because it's coming up again and again.
So I'm sure you would know from your time in Parliament, where you look at these reports and there's about 5 pages of acronyms at the back, explaining things. I think to get all that from the Navy, the Army, the Air Force into some kind of common language would be a huge
One side
task.
of A4, please.
So I think you're kind of touching on that, and I think perhaps we're hitting on the mistake that people make, that we talk about transferable skills, but it's not skills that military people bring to the civilian workforce. It's behaviours, it's a sense of who they are, it's their values, who they are as people. So actually, when you recruit a veteran, what do you know you're getting? You know you're getting somebody that's probably really loyal and has integrity. You know you're probably getting somebody that is disciplined, is hopefully going to give you less problems than the average employee, and they're probably going to stay and work harder for your company. Now, you have to accept that in your conventional job skills, they might need a bit of retraining, or there's a bit of catching up to do. But actually, what I've learned from running both a company and charity, if you have people with the right mindset, the skills can come on board very quickly. And
I think one of those values is the selfless commitment, which is where we come forward for volunteering. It is just part of us. So you don't actually see it being any different. I don't see myself as having done anything different during the pandemic, because I wasn't doing anything. But what could I do? And there was a lot of people that said, "Oh, it's all right for you. You've got a skill that you can use and put to use." But I think any number of people found different skills, and I'm very lucky through my own transition that I was asked to be one of the national ambassadors for the Army Cadet Force. Now, what I saw of those young people and the adult volunteers during the pandemic is incredible. The innovation of the different things that they've been able to go and do. So they're learning these selfless commitment right from a really young age, from the age of 12. They're seeing other people do it. They're seeing veterans who've gone and done it before them. So, I think that is it's the values that we learn.
So having sat with a foot in both camps, as it were, what were the major challenges for you in transitioning back out again? Obviously, there were extenuating circumstances, which you've alluded to. But
there were, and that made it difficult because, unlike the other two, it wasn't a choice. It wasn't something that I wanted to do, and I actually fought quite hard not to. But I feel that I was really lucky to be scooped up by the Army Cadet Force. I feel that they helped me and really have given me that sense of purpose, that especially during 2020, when a year when a few months before being told everything's been very different for you, I still am able to wear a uniform in a capacity, and I'm very lucky to have a rank slide that only 3 people in the UK have as an Army Cadet Force ambassador, and I'm really, really proud of that. So that very much eased me, and I think that is something that veterans can use, all those values and standards to be able to take, because you're then instilling them into the next generation, and that's the same as primary school teaching or young offenders.
How do we encourage that? How have you had to? I mean, is it something that you've been aware of, or is it just, no, I'm going to go and volunteer to help out with the Nightingale Hospital because that's what I do? How can we harness that, the assets that service personnel bring?
I think it is that, what's the word? It's the military veterans sort of playing down their skills because of being humble and the humility that they have as people. So it's very hard to stand up and say, I've done this, I've done that, because it's been part of your job. So anybody who's been to Afghanistan very rarely will tell you much about it. So it often does have to be drawn out. And in resettlement, you do get taught that you need to sell yourself. But I think it's that fine line between confidence and arrogance and humility and...
But when we have a sense of purpose, which I think has been really clearly outlined today, when we have a sense of purpose, is that not just a natural drive?
Absolutely, yeah. It's just within you. I mean, I've volunteered since the age of 16, and people say, you're always doing this, you're always doing that. I've just always done it. It's never been...
So is one message from today, follow your heart?
Yeah, I think it is. And if you're humble with that as well, I think that can help others.
You campaign now a lot around raising awareness of mental health, which is something we all have. Mental health, mental fitness.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and why you're so passionate about it.
I have had my own struggles with my mental health, my mental fitness. And as a physiotherapist, I'm very... I've always been about physical fitness and getting people strong and driving them forward. And often people's mental fitness will be affected when their physical fitness is affected. So again, it's something that has sort of always been a part of me when it's been other people. And I'm very, very good at being able to help other people when they're having challenges. It's when it's yourself, whether it's that selfless commitment again, that you put others first. And I think we're all very good at helping others, not quite so good at helping ourselves. But yeah, we do all have it, and it's really important to champion that we have it. And there's times when it's strong, and there's times when it's not quite so strong, and we need to continue with that training. So if you look at physical fitness, people go to the gym, they get fit. If they don't continue doing that fitness, that will deteriorate. So if somebody does have a mental health challenge, it's not just getting them through that time, it's then utilising what they've learned to continue, because there probably are going to be more bumps in the road. It's life.
And again, I think it is important to stress that happens to us all. And in the same way, if you sprained your ankle as a physio, you'd be offering a crutch, to sort of help that person through. But I do wonder, and we've talked about it in the previous episode, in terms of employers, that do you think there is a perception, obviously right or otherwise, that they might worry, for want of a better word, when employing veterans about their mental health because of the challenges, because of their, and dare I say, in the media we read so much about post-traumatic stress and that maybe some unhelpful labels that are given to veterans, and what would we do in that regard? And I'd like to bring you all in on that, but Sally, to you first.
I think if you look at veterans through the pandemic, and sorry to keep coming back to the pandemic, but they have actually been some of the strongest people, because they're used to the life that not knowing what's going to be happening, things changing, being away from people. So there's a lot of strengths there that the rest of the nation haven't perhaps had to deal with previously. So this is why mental health across the board has become much more visible to a lot more people, whereas I think that's a true strength of service people that veterans can bring. So it doesn't have to be in a mad, bad or sad way. It really is in a strength and resilience and what you've learned and taken forward.
Yeah, I mean, if you can live in a goat shed for 6 months, then...
We didn't have Netflix, so so comparatively, being on lockdown hasn't been that bad, but I'd definitely echo what Sally said. I think there's a certain amount of being told that actually we need to sit still, and staying at home is for the good of the country. And I think some people have struggled with that, and I suspect veterans have probably taken to it quite well, because actually the only way we've managed to get through this is by being disciplined. I think the mad, bad or sad analogy that is often thrown at veterans. I think as a society, fortunately, we are becoming more aware of mental health and people's well-being. So I think there has been a positive move away from perhaps those labels. I think it should be something that concerns employers far less than maybe it did 10, 15 years ago.
I certainly know for myself, my mental health challenges, it isn't related to operations. And although I saw some really horrific things, it was that sense of purpose that actually helped me, because I felt like I was doing something, I was making a difference. And that's why it is the highlight of my career was going to Afghanistan.
And is that a message then for people listening and watching today to take away, is actually find your purpose? And it might be a different one, but it might be along the same lines. As we've been discussing in terms of serving your community, serving your country, it's along the same lines. Is it just once you've found your purpose, which presumably if you're enjoying your military career, actually you can then make that transition as long as you find something else that makes your heart sing, as it were. It might be in a different format, but if it's still giving you purpose, if it still fuels that sense of purpose, then actually, I'm just thinking of people that think, well, this transition is the hardest bit. How do I know that I can have faith in making that jump? And I think if you know that what you're going to do is going to feed your soul, then you're onto a good thing. Would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about, battling those misconceptions that are out there as well. Also, but there are companies, such as Deloitte, which are purposely reaching out to veterans because they appreciate the enormous value they can bring to a company, and that is the message we need to get out there. The message that if you employ a veteran, they will add value to your company, and that's whether you're running you're a sole trader or whether you are a huge, multinational company. They are going to do good things for you. And I think that's the message. We need to keep beating that drum constantly, because I think you're right. Mental health has been, certainly when I was in the military, it wasn't something you openly kind of maybe discussed as much. And now you can kind of see that narrative changing. And I certainly, as I speak to people who are serving still, it is something that is talked about a lot more. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be kind of hiding away. Talk about it, and it will kind of, the truth will set you free, as it were.
I think there are two particular things that we don't speak about enough, and actually they're the most important things that veterans need to seek after their career, and they are a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose. And I think both of those things are resonating through your experiences, Sally. So having a sense of purpose in the military is, going about your professional work, very clearly what you're doing day to day, whether you're on operations, why you're there. And that provides a sense of certainty. But the second point about belonging, the military gives everybody a real sense of belonging. The entire structure is if you're part of a family. So if you join at 17, 18, you have a troop or platoon sergeant who effectively is a father figure. You have corporals, lance corporals who effectively are like elder brothers or cousins or uncles. This structure goes throughout the entire organisation. So when you then leave the military, what many people I think are experiencing is that loss of belonging and that loss of purpose, which is why it's so important to find a way to give back to your community, to be patriotic locally, if you were, because that firstly gives you a sense of purpose, but also you start to belong to new communities. I think quite often maybe we talk too much about the professional side, and obviously everyone has to earn enough money to pay the bills and to pay for their rent and food. But I think the stuff that people really struggle with is looking back on their military career and recognizing how much they belonged and how much purpose they had. But then once you leave, that is kind of taken away, and that's what you have to fight really hard to secure.
Really important
point. No, I think that's a huge, that really resonates with me actually, that kind of sense of belonging. And it's something, even 12 years now that I'm still looking for, always still looking for in the organisations that you kind of, you join or you get involved with, right? Who are the fellow veterans, who served, and you kind of make a beeline for them, and you've got instant common ground with them, and you can strike up a conversation, even a kind of, us three have never met before. We could all quite happily chatting for an hour before this, like we're kind of long lost brothers and sisters. And I think that's the beauty of the veteran community, is it doesn't matter whether you are a brigadier general or a private soldier. You've all got that kind of similar experience which you can draw upon and share with each other. You've all got stories to tell, which is wonderful. And I think
Yeah, it's a really lovely point to end on. And I'm just, again, I've got, in my mind, I've got those who are sitting thinking, got to make the transition. Actually, it sounds, and I've got a really clear sense that if you just reach out, there's going to be a hand that will help you sort of cross that divide, because you've all been there.
I feel that I'm still there, because there are lots of veterans within the Army Cadets that have gone on to be adult volunteers, because it is that sense of belonging that they're realising there are people that get what I'm saying. They get the things that perhaps they don't get in their other parts of their lives. So they're all drawing on as well, which is why I think it's such a community of people that it is. And I have just seen some wonderful things, some really, really great things from some amazing people.
So let's leave everybody, if we can, with a thought or two to share in terms of biggest lessons that you've learned in making the transition. Any pieces of advice that you would say, do this first or hold this in mind, and just a final thought on the values and that sense of purpose that we've been talking about today, and how people might kind of get their sense of their selves outside to maintain that sense of purpose. How can they do that and have faith that they can do that? Sorry, probably big thoughts to be throwing at you for the last, but give me what you will.
I think, I suppose my advice to anyone leaving would be to use that resettlement time to its absolute max. Get as many experiences as you possibly can in as many different kind of careers and industries as you can, and use those to kind of power you into what you feel passionate about. So, if you go into I don't know, teaching, and you're really, really passionate about that, you can kind of drive forward on that. And I think that's important. And kind of the second thing that I would kind of say would be to rely on people who have already left as well. So ask them questions. If somebody's left, no doubt you've got a friend who's left a year before you or 2 years before you, send them a message, just ask them how it's going. They will talk you through the challenges that they've had. And I think that's a really, really important tool to use as well, because at the end of the day, I think the values are ingrained kind of in all of us across all three services, and there's kind of no drawing them out. They're part of you. They're part of your DNA. So I think an employer will see your value, definitely, and you will go through periods of applying for lots of jobs and you'll get no responses, and it's really disappointing. But you will find something that fits you, and I think just keep pushing, keep driving, use that resilience that we know we've all got.
Mike?
I think anyone that is leaving the forces now, it's important to remember that it is only the start of the journey. Things will change, you will be taken in different directions. You may have a plan A, but be prepared to embrace plan B, C, D, and just be open to that change, and don't be worn down if you get rejection. Rejection is part of life, and there is more uncertainty with being a civilian, but depend on that resilience, as Stephen says, and just embrace the journey and find where you do belong, because there is so much that veterans have to offer in the wider community.
Yeah, reaching out for help. There's lots of people who've been there and done it before, and there will be people that will follow, so you'll find your own way in that path. So yeah, reach out to lots of people, and just be open. Don't be tunnel vision and thinking I've got to do it. And it doesn't. Everybody's timeline is very different as well. We've spoke about the different times when we've left, and some of it's taken longer and some of it's not taken as long. So it's not comparing yourself to anybody else. But following your own heart is what we said before.
And final quick word, one or two, to an employer. What are the skills and assets that they are buying into when they take on someone who's served?
I think they will feel good that they're embracing somebody who's got so much skills and value, and they can actually draw out of them things that perhaps are that person doesn't shout about, but they'll draw them out. And once you've got that kind of person within your company, it will resonate with so many other people, and they will become a champion of other people.
And maybe to remember to question them a little bit more, to find out, to remember that actually they might not be getting the full story. They need to sometimes draw these skills out.
Yeah, but it's amazing what you can have in later conversations. I didn't know you did that.
Yeah.
I didn't know you did that. I didn't know
So
you
there's a
did
duty, I think, on the employer too, to think, right, you've served, that tells me quite a lot. I'm going to, if you're being humble, I'm going to draw that from you. But what would you say in terms of, if I'm the employer sitting here now, why should I take on a veteran?
Because you'll always be able to depend on them. You can always depend on a veteran. So what you need from them, they will give you their all. They will give you integrity. They will give you loyalty. They will give you determination. And when your back might be up against the wall or your business is struggling, they'll be there working really hard for you alongside you.
And that won't just be in the 9 till 5, that if a job needs doing, it will be out of those hours as well till the job's done.
I think we've talked about a lot of values there, and I think I would probably just repeat those. But my biggest one would be a sense of humour. They're going to look at adversity and they're going to smile and they're going to laugh at it, and they're going to be the person that you can have a drink with down the pub on a Friday. You can go, look at that week we've just got through.
So thank you to my guests, Stephen James, Mike Crofts and Sally Orange. In the next episode, we'll explore the skill set veterans bring to future industries. I do hope you'll join us then on Veterans Work, the podcast. Bye-bye.